here as well, as long as my boyfriend too. So I appreciate their support here. And to give you a little background on my education, I grew up homeschooled. Actually, no, I didn't. I was in kindergarten through 3rd grade. I went to a Christian school, and then was homeschooled from 4th grade up into a super senior year. So I was in high school till I was 19. And then I took a gap year and went down to Colorado, where I had some biblical training. And the summer before that, I had an intense, like, 2-week biblical worldview training. And from there, really found a really deep reason to really study the things of, like, theology and apologetics. And by no means am I any kind of, you know, it would be amazing to be like, have, I don't know, Sean McDowell here to speak to you today, or that would be amazing too. But I haven't had the honor of, like, sitting under, like, people like him, hearing him speak, or and other people I bring up today too. And Pastor Keith asked me to speak, and I thought, you know, I actually genuinely love studying this, and I would love to share with you just a little bit that I've learned, but also my goal here isn't to give you, first off, I don't have time to give you an in-depth anything. It's very surfacey and introductory, but I think that is appropriate just because of the sheer, like, volume of all that's out there in terms of knowledge. It wouldn't be attainable in, like, less than an hour. But today I titled my talk Understanding the Times, which, to be honest with you guys, a lot of this content isn't my own. Right here is a book, textbook, Understanding the Times by Jeff Myers and David A. Noble. So David Noble is the president of Summit, which is where I went to get worldview training. And then Jeff Myers is now the current president. And I really learned a lot from both of them. And this is a lot of their study and their research. But and so I decided to really pull from that today. But Jeff Myers, really, I've got the pleasure of listening to him speak a couple times. And he always starts out when he talks to students about worldview, he starts with this topic of, and this idea of understanding the times, and what does that mean? The term actually comes from 1 Chronicles 12:32, and I was reading through that this morning, actually. It talks about David's mighty men, and at the beginning it talks about, actually names, a lot of them, and I'm not going to read all the names to you, but the main verse that this comes from is 1 Chronicles 12:32, and where it says, of Issachar, men who had understanding of the times to know what Israel ought to do, 200 chiefs and all their kinsmen under their command. And then it goes on to talk about how some of the mighty men were with David, and then some deserted him when things got hard. And actually verse 22 of 1 Chronicles talks about these men being like an army of God. And it wasn't the mere fact that they had anything special about them. It was the fact that, like Jeff Myers likes to say, they were just simple people, and, quote, one person who is deeply committed to a cause will do so much more for that cause than 1,000 people who are merely interested. And so this morning, I really want to really start getting you interested in really knowing why it's worth understanding the times, understanding worldview. And I know a lot of you, obviously, you're here because you know it's important. There's some merit here, right? But I think even I was wrestling with this today, like even this morning I was thinking a lot about it, like why is worldview really important? And it was really impactful, I think for a lot of you too, and even me, I was just blown away by hearing people's testimonies, right? And people are asking questions of, you know, am I loved? Why do I hurt? What is my purpose? Is there any hope? And I am an intern over at Pulse Ministries right now, and one of the interns is a teaching and preaching intern, and she told us one day, she was like, guys, you know, because she loves apologetics too. She's a very, very smart, very intelligent person. And she was like, guys, you know, people don't really care if you actually have the logical answers. They really want to know answers to their personal questions. But that being said, when you come to someone and you show them that you have been someone who really is studying the world around you, it not only gives you some credence with them, but also it gives you some more ground to stand on. So this morning, again, with only less than an hour, it's going to be really tough to really dive into any of these things really deep. But I wanted to talk about the 6 main, well, according to Noble and Myers, there's 6 main worldviews today, which are Christianity, Islam, Secularism, Marxism, New Spirituality, and Post-Modernism. So first I want to introduce you to what these all are. Obviously Christianity you're familiar with, but we're still going to define that and talk about it. And then what each believe on like a very, very basic level. And then I didn't want to leave it there, but also I can't get into depth about Christian response because you're like, wait, this is apologetics we're talking about. Like, isn't this supposed to be about the Christian response? Well, yes, but also, I really want to kind of connect it back to what Pastor Keith's been talking about, which is sharing your God story. And I really want all of you to kind of, when you're thinking about what I'm talking about, it's not so much about head knowledge, which is good, but also when you're in conversation with people, start listening for these pattern of ideas, which is what worldviews are, right? Pattern of ideas we see in the world today. And so when you start talking to someone, you can notice, oh, that's, say, for example, like a Marxist thing that the person just said, and they may not even know it themselves. And then from there, you can start, again, like I said, you have credence with people when you have even a better understanding of their worldview sometimes than they do, which isn't always the point. The point isn't to ever come down on someone or say anything like, oh, wow, you don't know what you're talking about, but it's understanding the patterns. And again, like one thing Jeff always told us was you don't have to be 100% sure of everything. It's really about identifying those wrong views in the world and isolating like what makes these ideas faulty or wrong, and then informing people about, okay, well, have you thought about this? Here's a better way, and then investing to help sick people get well. So let me begin first off with defining Christianity, as all of us are, well, we're told to be Christians, right? But even among the church, there's, disagreements too, and I'm not going to get into that. But it's important that we start out with defining what Christianity is, just as a basic understanding here. Christianity is a theistic worldview centered on the person of Jesus Christ that derives its understanding of the world through the teachings of the Holy Spirit. Our basic theology is really simple. Through Jesus Christ, or not simple, but I mean like understanding, about our faith. I mean, and all of you have understanding too. Through Jesus Christ, God created the world. Humans were made in God's image, but we fell to sin. The fall brings brokenness, and not only to us, but the rest of creation. And then God's Son, Jesus Christ, paid for our sin and bought redemption with his own life. And really, our faith is based on the person of Jesus Christ. John Stott, who's a theologian, says, quote, "Christ is the center of Christianity. All else is circumference." And now, while other worldviews really offer either how to search for God or search for meaning, Christianity turns that on its head and says, it's not us who's searching for God, it's God who searched, it's not us who searched for God, God searched for us. And Christians believe that God has made himself known through general revelation and special revelation. What is general revelation? It's the universe we experience, nature. And Christians believe that the universe that we are in suggests that there is an intelligent, purposeful, and personal designer. And then what is special revelation? Oh, pardon me. Special revelation is the Word of God. And there are a few beliefs that are unique in a way to Christianity. First, that God is personal. Again, like I mentioned, the God is a relational creator. He made human beings in his image. We are created to create. Also, we believe that humans have a significant role, not only like now, but also forever in history. We are eternal beings. We believe that. Interesting thing I was doing when I was researching here, the Hebrew word for very good, Genesis, when God says, made man, and it was very good. This word literally means exceedingly, heartbreakingly, abundantly, richly, loudly, immeasurably good in a festive, generous, happy, intelligent, charming, and splendid way. Yes. So it's an overflowing of God looking at his creation and saying, very good, and very good doesn't really, even begin to describe how God thinks about us. God's characteristics are also fully independent of our understanding or use of them. This is something, like during my internship right now, we've had a couple opportunities to really present the gospel, like to our intern group to kind of practice presenting the gospel. And one thing I kind of like to, like when I'm presenting the gospel or thinking about how would I present my faith to someone who I'm in conversation with, is even coming back to the idea that a lot of our beliefs aren't from us, if that makes sense. Like, for example, if say there's a hard topic, and you know what you believe on this, and the other person has maybe even an emotional response to it and isn't going to appreciate what you have to say. One thing I always come back to, it's like, my belief doesn't come, from me. It's from, like, God's the one that says this, and that's why I believe it, which is a very odd thing even to believe, because even if, like, sometimes I'm like, truly? Like, do I understand this? Not 100%, but that's not what matters. It's because God says this is true, and that's why I believe it. That's what we believe, which, again, is very odd, as you'll see compared to the rest of other worldviews out there today. Christians believe that things function best according to their design. If we ignore this design, things do not function well. And missing the mark is also, so if you look at the word sin in Hebrew, a literal definition is missing the mark. It was interesting to hear one testimonies this morning was God was described as this person in heaven who's just sitting there waiting to condemn you, right? And Christians would say that's like coloring it in a bad way, right? It's not that we're saying this is wrong because first off we aren't like defining sin. It's because we see there is a design, and when we stray from that design, then there's death, and things are not going to work well. And sin never heals. It only corrupts. D. James Kennedy, who's an evangelist, he says, quote, "When a person makes up his own ethical code, he always makes up an ethical system which he thinks he has kept. In the law of God, we find a law which smashes our self-righteousness, eliminates all trust in our own goodness, and convinces us that we are sinners. The law of God leaves us with our hands over our mouths and our faces in the dust. We are humbled before God and convinced that we are guilty transgressors of his law." But then again, it doesn't end there. Christians, we believe that the Redeemer, God, buys back his wayward creation, and eternity and life now is, we have hope for these things. It's not that God, like, oh, now we just wait around for heaven to happen, and even when we get to heaven, like, what does that look like? We believe that heaven is going to be, you know, something like a life after this one that's full of meaning and purpose too, which we don't get a ton of glimpse into in Scripture. But I really like something that when I was researching, Leslie Newbigin, who was a missionary to India. He was really a missionary to Hindus. And he had a friend who was a Hindu, who said, "I can't understand why you missionaries present the Bible to us in India as a book of religion. It's not a book of religion. And anyway, we have plenty of books of religion in India. We don't need any more. I find in your Bible a unique interpretation of universal history, the history of the whole creation and the history of the human race, and therefore a unique interpretation of the human person as a responsible actor in the history. That is unique. There's nothing else in the whole religious literature of the world to put alongside it." To sum up, the key word for Christianity is healing. That's what we believe. And again, God is the eternal creator who created both the spiritual and material world and made human beings in his image. Humanity is broken because of sin. Jesus' redemption makes it possible for us to experience healing and bring healing to every aspect of society. So to transition now into the 5 other worldviews, interestingly enough, the Bible doesn't specifically call out and address these worldviews, which for some might cause a little bit of confusion, like, well, then what does the Bible actually have to say? One interesting thing I found is that there were actually other worldviews present in Bible times that were similar enough to give us insight into the modern perspective. And not only that, but if we believe that our faith is going to be something that outlasts, this world, or this time rather, then we believe that it should have something to say about time today, which it does. So I'm first going to talk about Islam. Islam is a theistic worldview centered on the life of the Prophet Muhammad that derives its understanding of the world through the teachings of the Quran, Hadith, and Sunnah. And I'll define those books here in a second. But first, we have to define a couple terms here too. We have to define Sharia Law. Sharia law is derived primarily from the Quran and the Sunnah. Sharia law is the moral and legal code that governs the lives of Muslims. Sharia addresses a wide variety of subjects such as diet, sexual practices, hygiene, prayer, contracts, business, crime, and punishment. So it really governs everything. If Muslims wondering what to do, they're going to look to their Sharia law. And also, these are the laws that are actually instituted in Islamic countries. So they're actually actual law. And then jihad is also something we have to just touch on too, because obviously as Americans, with 9/11 having just been recent history, I thought it was something important to address. I'm not going to really dive deep into a ton on it, but I thought it was important to address though. So jihad is from the Arabic word translated as struggle. Jihad is both the inner struggle and battle of every Muslim to fulfill his or her religious duty and the outer physical struggle against the enemies of Islam. And there is tension here because obviously there's Muslims that they believe jihad looks one way, and then you see our Muslim neighbors today that aren't living the same way. So you think, what does this mean? And I was going to talk a bit more about that, but I'm not going to do time. But it's important for you to understand that there is tension here in Islam, and there are Muslims who are going to look at some jihadists today and they're going to say, I don't agree, which again is going to be when you start, again, I think this is all about me wanting you to, when you have conversations with people, asking then different Muslims about how they interpret Quran and their writings, because it is going to be different, interestingly enough. But all that to say, it is something that we just want to address because it is something we immediately think about when we think about Islam. So Islam itself, though, the word itself means submission. And authority is really what matters in Islam. It's a shame and honor culture. People are shamed for not fulfilling group expectations, and if they're shamed, people will seek to restore their honor before the community. The Muslim is someone who submits to Allah and the principles of Islam. And the three sources of authority, which I mentioned earlier, are the Quran. This is the written revelation of Allah. This is their highest authority. They have a couple, but this is like the highest of the highest. And it's not like our Bible, where we believe the Bible is the inspired word of God. Muslims rather, they believe that the Quran is the literal words of Allah that were dictated over 22 years. And then next we have the Hadith, which is the written traditions of what Muhammad said, did, or approved of. So based on this man, who was a real person who lived. And then the Sunnah, which is the life example of Muhammad. And so, again, this is a supreme example and authoritative as well. For any of you who took world religions, you'll remember these. There's 5 pillars of Islam, which are required behaviors that Muslims need to live by, which first is reciting the creed, which is, I think a general understanding is there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is prophet. But directly translated, it reads, I bear witness that there is no deity but God, and I bear witness that Muhammad is the messenger of God. And then daily prayer is also required. Muslims pray 5 times a day. The fast of Ramadan is a month-long fast during the daylight hours to commemorate Muhammad receiving the Quran. And then there's giving of alms. Muslims are actually required to give 2.5% of their money to care for the poor and needy. And then the pilgrimage to Mecca, which is a once-in-a-lifetime. You need to go to Mecca over in the Middle East, and you need to perform your various rituals at least once in your lifetime. And then there are 6 articles of faith, which are also required beliefs. You need to believe in the unity of God. There only exists one God who exists as one person, so there's one difference right away between us and what a Muslim would believe. You need to believe in God's angels. Muslims actually believe that there are, I believe it's 2 angels that follow you around and keep track of all your deeds and basically keep an account. And Allah created angels to administrate his kingdom, which is interesting because that almost sounds like something that we'd believe, but it's definitely not the same. And then 3, the Muslims need to believe in God's prophets, which is interesting because they actually believe that Jesus was one of Allah's prophets, but he wasn't the divine son of God. Even though they have a high view of Jesus, Jesus is seen merely as a human being, which will become important here in a sec. Just keep that in mind. You need to believe in God's books, which would be, they define God's books as the books I've just described here a few minutes ago. And you also need to believe in the final judgment. Everyone's going to be judged according to your deeds. And then you need to believe in divine destiny. Everything happens, it happens because it was the divine decree of Allah. And I was talking to someone a few days ago about this, and they were looking at, oh, you're talking about Islam? Well, that's not very relevant. And I was like, I think it is. And I was like, I actually wanted to look though and see how many, what's the Muslim population here in Minnesota? And actually, we have 5,706,398 Muslims here in Minnesota in 2021, which is interesting. But not only that, but Muslims are actually becoming more and more of, they're having a voice here, not only just in the US, totality of America, but also actually here in the cities. Let's see here. I wanted to actually, before I point out an example here, I found this quote from, goodness, I had it cited. But, oh, yes, it was from the World Population Review. Quote, during the 20th century, the United States saw the largest increase in the Muslim population between 1991 and 2012. Approximately 1.7 million Muslims entered the United States as legal permanent residents. Approximately 72% of the American Muslim population today are immigrants or second generation. So today, you're going to probably meet more people who are now children of immigrants that came here even just a generation ago. So this was someone who I looked up because I wanted to see even how are Muslims and it really being influential in Minnesota. And this man here, Jamal Osman, he is just recently on the Minneapolis City Council, and which is very interesting. He lives here in the cities, and I was reading and doing some research on him, and he actually said, quote, it's amazing to see a Muslim woman in Congress, and it's great to see people like me being elected into City Council, and we're here to stay, and we are here to be part of the political process in the United States. So not only are Muslims your neighbors, but they are also now starting to become part of the political voice of America, but also even right here in the cities. Another thing I want to talk about is just in general, a general statistic you can go off of is about 1 in every 5 person is going to actually hold to the Muslim faith today, and that number is only growing. So I also wanted to now kind of transition over to what is our Christian response going to look like. This is Alan Schliemann. This is someone who I get the pleasure of listening to at Summit. He's with Stand to Reason, which Stand to Reason, and I actually want to give you a little bit of background on who Alan is too, because it's important to know who I'm sourcing. Alan Schliemann is an author and speaker for Stand to Reason and trains Christians to share their convictions in a persuasive yet gracious manner. He teaches on abortion, evolution, homosexuality, bioethics, and Islam. Islam's actually the biggest thing. He has a real passion for talking about Islam. And Stand to Reason, just to give you a little bit of background on what that is, it's basically an apologetics training platform, kind of like Summit, but just another organization doing the exact same thing. And I really appreciate what Schliemann said. I went back in time and actually looked at my notes from 2017 when I was a student, and similar to the notes that I took this summer from hearing him speak again, and they're very much the same. His message hasn't changed actually at all. He said, like the first thing he starts out with saying is, you as a Christian, you're Christ's ambassador. How you come across to a Muslim is how you're representing Christ. So you're embodying Jesus in your mannerisms and everything, and so you need to keep that in mind first. Muslims love to talk about God and religion, according to Schliemann himself. He talks with a lot of Muslims. I believe, if I'm remembering this correctly, his family holds to the Muslim faith as well. And it's interesting, too, we have a commonality here in Jesus. You know, Muslims have to believe in Jesus. It's required. So Schliemann says, when you're encountering someone who is Islamic, ask them what do you think about Jesus? And you do believe Jesus, is authoritative. They have to, as a Muslim, you have to agree that first off, he was a person who lived and he was one of God's prophets, right? One thing Schliemann says to really talk to Muslims about is, are you confident you'll go to heaven? Because, with Muslims, it's going to be about our deeds, right? And then from there, you can talk about, let me introduce to you a better way, the gospel, right? And there's more to talk about here, but I want to keep moving. I really wanted to talk a little bit about Nabil Qureshi. My apologies, Nabil. But he was somebody who actually was at Summit before he actually ended up passing away a few years ago from cancer. And so it was actually really interesting. I just missed him when he was there. They actually have, it's really cool. At Summit, they have this building that they then bought, and they dedicate it to him because he lived there for a couple of years, actually on site in Colorado with students. And like I said, it's really disappointing. I was like this close to having been one of those students who could have been there in person with him. I read this book, though. Actually, when I was in high school, I did a speech on this book because his story was so powerful to me, even as like a high schooler. This is his biography. He was a devout Muslim who was seeking God, like truly seeking God. And in college, he encountered a friend who was a really strong Christian. And from there, he had to come to terms with why is this Christian, have these strong beliefs and I have these, but I'm feeling so lost. And I have, this Christian says he believes in God. I say I believe in God, but yet our lives aren't the same. And what's going on here? So I really actually highly recommend, Pastor Keith told me to give you book recommendations. This is one I highly, highly recommend, especially because Nabil got a ton of backlash too, not only in his life, but I'm sure, after too, from not only his family, but the Muslim community. So, even just for the sake of I don't know, I would love to see his book, even after he's gone, just continue to get a lot of traction, because it is truly a really powerful story. I wanted to give you a really brief quote from him, because what he says is really powerful, because as a former Muslim, right, we can have a lot of confidence in what he says, and someone who, was actually interacting with a Christian and then became a Christian himself. I'm trying to figure out which one I want to read to, though I have two, but they're both a little long. Okay, this one is really related to what Pastor Keith was talking about inviting people into our homes and really developing relationships with people. So Nabil says, quote, on the rare occasion that someone does invite a Muslim to his or her home, differences in culture and hospitality may make a Muslim feel uncomfortable, and the host must be willing to ask, to learn, to accept, and overcome this. There are simply too many barriers for Muslim immigrants to understand Christians and the West by sheer circumstance. Only the exceptional blend of love, humility, hospitality, and persistence can overcome these barriers, and not enough people make the effort. So, just all that to say is really reach out to your Muslim neighbors. Like I said, they actually do like talking about their beliefs, and it is really going to be you demonstrating, like, yeah, here is me as a Christian living my life, following Jesus and loving him, and it's going to really be your consistency in that, and them seeing that will really, again, just start to probably have them start questioning, like, why don't I feel that? I want to move on. Again, I'm sorry, this is very, very surface level. I want to talk more about everything today, but we're going to move on to secularism and what this is. So defined, secularism as a worldview is an atheistic and materialistic worldview that advocates for a public society free from the influence of religion. So complete 180, secularism is, there's like no gods involved at all. If you can't see it, hear it, or feel it, it doesn't exist. Matter is all that matters. So key concepts here are naturalism. So only the natural laws and forces exist as opposed to anything supernatural. And materialism is also a key belief here. Matter, which is materialism, is matter is the fundamental substance in nature and the fundamental substance of all things, including mental states and consciousness. So your thoughts are actually matter, if that makes any sense. Which to us, like, our mindset's so much different, but that's what a secularist would believe, right? So what is the secularist narrative? So first, God's irrelevant. Most secularists to be secularist, you have to be atheist. Paul Kurtz, who is a prominent American scientific skeptic and humanist, he's actually been called the father of modern secularism. He says, quote, "No deity will save us. We must save ourselves." And that was actually in the Humanist Manifesto, which I was going to go into what that was too, but due for time I can't. But the Humanist Manifesto, if you are interested in hearing like the history of where secularism came from, that'd also be something you should read, is the Humanist Manifesto. So Kurtz would say that if materialism is true, any concern about non-material things like God is at best misguided and at worst deluded. So that's what they would say about, us going to church, us believing in God. And by denying God's existence, secularists say we can deny the existence of absolute moral code that must be obeyed. Kurtz also is quoted with saying, "The traditional supernaturalistic moral commandments are especially repressive of our human needs." So, repressive of our human needs, interesting wording there. "They are immoral insofar as they foster illusions about humanity, and they foster illusions about our destiny, and they suppress our vital inclinations." Translation, well, I think you can imagine what that means. I'm not going to go to that here. So secularists say, you have needs, you have urges, don't ignore that. Versus Christians, we say, there's morals, there's laws that God calls us to follow to. We need to follow that. Secularists say, that's repressive, that's bad, that's actually really harmful for you. Secularists, they embrace the narrative that religion and science are opposed to each other. And they would say that religion is based on superstition and ignorance, but science is systematic. Science is an impartial application of reason and intelligence. Secularists would also say that science has rescued the modern world from the religiously backward. And they would also say that evolution is also the modern medicine, that's also a secularist term, modern medicine, which is taking the place of God. To a secularist, science isn't just a way of knowing, it's the only reliable way of knowing. Another thing secularists would say is that humans are good by nature. As Christians, we believe humans are actually very corrupt by nature, and secularists would say the exact opposite. They would say, so where does evil come from? It's actually from society. Society and institutions are responsible for the evil that we do. And I have something here. Let me see if I can find it real quick. Pardon me here. Here we go. It's from a quote from Abraham Maslow, who was a secularist, who says, which is again tying back to that humans are good by nature. He says, quote, "As far as I know, we don't just have any intrinsic needs for evil." And Paul Kurtz, who I quoted before, he said that humans are perfectible. And again, anything we see wrong with us coming from society, it's the way you grew up. It's not the fact that we're inherently evil. And so another thing we need to look at is where secularism is influential today. David Noisy, who's the president of American Humanist Association, he says that about 12 to 18% of people today are secularists, and we actually see this in university mostly. It's predicted that, when you send out, when people go off to college, you're going to run into secularist professors. Secularists believe that they are, liberators and people that are actually going to help, especially young people, be free from these religious oppression that you've had all your life. And so I think a lot of, especially people in the church are concerned, why are young people losing their faith, especially in college? It's a lot of people haven't really stopped to consider first off what they believe. And then when they come into this university setting where there's a professor there who is very, very knowledgeable, very skilled. And this is actually something Sean McDowell talks about a lot, who I'm going to quote probably him a lot here. He is Josh McDowell's son, and Josh had a similar thing. He came into school, and he thought he believed, and then he encountered a secularist professor, and who was very, very smart, who hadn't answered everything he said. And it really made him question his faith, right? Because he was a young person who, well, why do I believe what I believe? For most people, it's because it's the only thing they've been taught. And that's my story actually, is when I was 18 and went to Summit, that was my only reason for why do I believe what I believe. It's because it's all I've ever been told, and it's how I grew up. And that was my answer. It really wasn't because I had really stopped to think, what is my faith actually true? So anyway, just to let you know, this is something that is pervasive and ever growing too in the realm of thought, and especially people now coming out of university are going to believe these secularist beliefs. So the key word here is matter. So what secularists believe, they believe in matter. The physical universe is all there is. The spiritual world does not exist. Humans are good by nature, but humanity is broken because of ignorance. Redemption comes through sciences, not religion. Society and its institutions are responsible for the evil that we do. And so there's a couple different ways you can really approach this. There's a couple logical ways you could argue with someone through a logical response, which again is going to have to be on a case-by-case basis when you're talking to people. But a couple key things you can ask a secularist is, have you considered that you are actually a person of faith? Faith isn't religious. Faith is actually going to be defined here. How I define faith is putting your trust in something. So the question isn't, do you have faith, but what are you actually putting your faith in? Right, a secularist is putting their faith in what? Science. And humanity, a large part of humanity and human reason. So ask the person, is the thing you're putting your trust in worthy of your trust? Another thing you can ask them is science. Materialism cannot explain the world we know it today. Although, again, secularists would argue differently. Honestly, science can't even explain yawning. Science can't actually even explain DNA, because not all DNA is physical, interestingly enough. But science can't explain consciousness, and there are phenomena that's not physically reducible. It's just the basic fact of reality is it's not. So point that out to people, really ask them, is that true? Does science really explain everything? It doesn't. Another thing you can ask a secularist is to explain the most profound human experiences. This is something that this summer, I was listening to Trip Allman, who, Trip was, when I was there in 2018, he was our semester, we call him our semester father. He was the people that watched, he was the man, rather, that watched over all of us, and was like a dad to us for 3 months, because we were, without our families, and so he was just very, not only wise, but super, super kind, and he's amazing. Anyway, he was speaking this summer, and he was giving this talk on secularism, and he, during his section on talking about when you're a Christian talking to a secularist, he stopped and he was talking to the students, and he said, can you explain beauty? You even as a Christian, can you explain joy? You can't. Except, as Christians we believe we do, because we say that would come from God, but a secularist, that made me stop dead in my tracks. Beauty, can you really explain what that means? Because it is it's something that is beyond the physical, is all I'm trying to say. And also something Tripp brought up too is, can you explain peace in the midst of suffering? Especially, and here it's going to come back to your life being on testimony for others, right? When a secularist is going to see a Christian having peace in the midst of suffering, how are they going to explain that? They're not going to be able to. And then another thing I would like to, talking to secularists, are we good? Really? Do you think humanity is actually good? Because I don't think we are. really. Rollo May has a really interesting quote. He was an American psychologist associated with the humanist psychology. Humanist philosophy, rather. He was alive from 1909 to 1994, so just recently he was alive on Earth. And and this is something that, again, someone keeps on bringing up, which I love this quote here. Today, we know a great deal about bodily chemistry and the control of physical diseases. But we know very little about why people hate, why they cannot love, why they suffer anxiety and guilt, and why they destroy each other. Moving on to Marxism. Oh, so sorry, just to wrap up there, I realized I left that hanging a little bit. That's a really heavy quote, but I think just really pointing out to secularists, because as Christians we believe there is something beyond the physical world. So if we believe that, then we should probably start to have people start to, oh, have you really considered this and that? So just a couple of things there to think about. Anyway, yes, so moving on to Marxism. This is something that's going to also move on a little bit different thought process from Islam and now secularism. Marxism is kind of a whole other realm of thought as well. It is an atheistic and materialistic worldview based on the ideas of Karl Marx that promotes the abolition of private property, public ownership, and the means of production, which is socialism, and the utopian dream of a future communistic state. So Marxists would believe that the physical universe is all there is, similar to what a secularist would believe. But Marxists, in their thinking, they're a lot more politically minded, economically minded. They're going to say there's only so much to go around, and if someone has more than another, it's because they stole it. Humanity is broken because the rich took more than their fair share. A couple key things to understand here about a Marxist would believe communism is a good thing, and communism is the Marxist ideal of classless and stateless utopian society in which all property is commonly owned and each person is paid according to his or her abilities and needs. A Marxist would be very much against capitalism, which is an economic system in which capital assets are privately owned and the prices, production, and distribution of goods and services are determined by competition within a free market. A Marxist would be in favor of socialism, Marxism, here's the way I've heard it described really well, is Marxism, if you think about it as a car, so if it's a vehicle, it's traveling the road of communism, which leads to socialism. Which socialism is an economic system based upon governmental or communal ownership of the means of production and distribution of goods and services. Karl Marx defined socialism as the abolition of private property. So I was doing some research because I was like, oh, I'm going to talk about Karl Marx. I need to find a picture of him. But it was actually kind of humorous. I found these along the way, which I hope you can read those. I won't take you a minute to see them. Can you guys see what that says? The first one on the left, it says, so these are memes. He said, this is under Karl Marx. It says, hated capitalism before it was mainstream. And then under the one on the right is, it costs $6 to visit Karl Marx's grave. And then underneath is, ironic, says the guy on the bottom. Thought that was funny, which is actually interesting though, because when I was doing research on this and trying to find even a picture of capitalism, I was searching on this free stock photo website. I searched capitalism. You guys, literally, on a stock photo website here, there were it was pictures of one picture was this sign on a protest, someone was holding up a sign saying capitalism is racist. And then another sign someone spray painted on a wall, capitalism is a disease. It's crazy. People actually believe that capitalism is really evil and wrong, so we need to kind of understand why people think that, especially if we're people that say capitalism is actually healthy and a good way for the economy to be. So anyway, a little bit about Karl Marx, this man. He did most of his work in the British Museum in London. Although he wrote about the working man, he actually never set foot in an actual factory that we know of, or made a living by physical labor. On February 21st in 1848, he published the Communist Manifesto, and this was a call to violent force, overthrow of the economy, overthrow of the government, overthrow of the church, and overthrow of the family. Actually, if you look at what these writings are actually saying, that's what it's promoting. Overthrow of everything. Revolution is the solution, right? According to Karl Marx, also atheism is the thing you need to believe in first. Quote from him is, the abolition of religion as the illusionary happiness of men is a demand, again, wording here is interesting, demand for the real happiness. The call to abandon their illusions about their condition is a call to abandon a condition which requires illusions. The criticism of religion is therefore the embryonic criticism of this value of tears of which religion is the halo. Yeah, he does hate religion. Interesting, too. And then, so like I said, Marxism, if it's the vehicle on the road, it's Marxism. You have the car on the road, it's traveling the road of, what did I say earlier? Thank you. Thank you. My brain is very full right now. Thank you, appreciate it. And then it's good, the end goal of Marxism is socialism, which is the targeting of private ownership of the means of production, and it's the philosophical heart of socialism. And again, as you've picked up on by now, in the Marxist worldview, everything is about economics. And any conflict is actually seen as an economic conflict. So anything evil in the world we say today is, oh, it's tied back to economics. It's tied back to not only our society, like a societal problem, but an economic problem. And so Marxists would believe that everything is money-driven. Marxists believe that society and history actually advance through conflict. So you have like a thesis, say, and an antithesis. They come together, and then there's a clash, there's conflict, and then what arises from that is a new idea. So a Marxist would say that conflict is actually really healthy and really good, and actually we need to promote it. So it's interesting, Jeff Myers, when he was giving this talk, he told us that when you look at the Twitter algorithm, interestingly enough, it's going to promote fighting, which sounds a little bit hard to believe, but if you believe like the Marxist worldview that conflict is actually a good thing, when the Twitter algorithm notices that there's a conflict, it's going to actually start to keep that going instead of trying to like derail it a little bit. Because if you are Marxist, you believe conflict is good because antithesis, thesis come together, and then from that conflict arises a new thought, which is good. Let's see here. I was doing some research and seeing where is Marxism actually in the world today. And there are more countries than this too a little bit, but the three big major countries that we all like would know by name, know pretty well what their economics are like. China, Cuba, North Korea are all Marxist countries, and their economic system is very much aligned with communism. One thing Myers likes to point out is the fact that very few of us in the West have really come to understand what happens in history when Marxists get their way, but really there's a lot of death that has arisen from those who come to believe in Marxism. In the Soviet Union, there's an estimated about 20 to 60 million people that have been killed from the government, and in China about 40 to 70 million that are dead due to Marxism. In Cambodia, about 2 million. North Korea, 1.6 million. Yugoslavia, 1.2 million. And in China, because of the one-child policy, there's been about 336 million abortions that have happened. Also primarily female abortions, which is interesting now because China is now seeing the repercussions of that. There's actually a lot of men who are coming now to like their doctors and reporting a lot of depression and a lot of really just unbalanced lives, and researchers are looking like, what's wrong with like China? What's wrong with our men in China? And there's not enough women to really balance out the population here, which is again just an interesting thing. I was in high school when I learned that, and that just blew my mind. Just the effects of these of Marxist ideas. The key word for Marxism is revolution. The physical universe is all there is. Again, materialism. It's just again going to be going back to what secularists would believe as well. But humanity is broken because the rich took more than their fair share. Redemption comes through an overthrowing of society's structures and a moving toward communism. So I really enjoy Jeff Myers. He has a really succinct, powerful response to, as a Christian, how you can really talk to someone who has Marxist thought. And the way he likes to word it is, so minds, I'll break this down, but minds with property will multiply the options to give. Minds with property will multiply the options to give. So first, minds. As Christians, we believe that humans, like we're all individuals who have each our own mind, and we are accountable to God for how we use our mind, first off. And a Christian would believe like we all are intelligent beings who have different thoughts, and how that's related here is property. A Christian would believe that we actually have a God-given right to property, and that stewardship is a God-given responsibility. When I was in middle school, I went to this camp, and it was a political camp, and I was just sitting there listening. Like, I don't remember a ton from it, but one thing I do remember is I was sitting there as a student, and one of the leaders, he said, you know, guys, the government, because what we had to do is we had to propose bills, and we had to pretend like we were like in Congress, and he kind of called out a student, and he said, well, you have actually faulty thinking here, because something the student had said was a little bit off, and he said, you need to remember that the government doesn't grant you your rights. The government is supposed to protect your rights, which I don't know why that was so mind-blowing to me, but so as a Christian, we believe the same thing. We believe that property isn't something that the government then says, oh, you now are able, like, we're going to give you the right to. We believe that we actually have a kind of a right to, not property necessarily, but just stewardship in general is something that God's called us to. And when you own something, also you want to take care of it, which Christians would say is actually a good thing. There's studies done to show that when someone has actually worked and earned for a thing, no matter what it is, if it's property, if it's a car, no matter what it is, you're going to actually have invested something in it, so then therefore you're going to want to actually take care of it. And then multiply. So Jeff Myers, I keep quoting him, but this summer he has an illustration for the students. I'm sure you've heard of this, but you think about if you have one pie and 10 people want a piece of pie, instead of thinking about, oh, how can we divide this pie up evenly, how about you just make more pies? Christians believe that there's actually opportunity for like economic growth, so Marxists would say there's only a limited amount of resources, but Christians and people that maybe have like more of a capitalist mindset would say no, like there's actually going to be room and growth for multiplication, because again, going back to minds, like promote, like you know, there's different opportunities out there. You know, it's not just limited to only the rich, quote unquote, to say. And then options. It's just going back to, again, challenging the idea of a Marxist who would say that like orders are from the government, like orders are what people need. And Christian would say, no, actually, like options are what people need. One thing that Marxists would point to is Acts 2, where it talks about, I'm sure you've heard this passage where it says like the Christians had everything in common and they were giving. And people might point to that and say, oh, doesn't that sound Marxist? Like they were in communal giving. The key there to note is it was their option. A Marxist would say the government is going to really control whether or not you have your option, and a Christian would say like it needs to be up to the individual person whether or not they're going to give or take, which is a key difference there versus a government control versus a free market. And then give, not grasp. So a Marxist would really have a lot of reason to want to grasping onto things, because if there's limited resources, then we're going to really want to grasp. But as a Christian, if we believe that there's actually room for growth, if there's the ability to actually, like, oh, we can start a business and that can happen, which could happen under a capitalist society, then there's reason to give and freedom to pursue innovation. So again, this is, again, not actually, if I'm being honest, not 100% my strongest, like economics is always hard for me in school, but this is something that I like to come back to when I'm thinking about if I ever encounter someone who is very economically minded and politically minded. If I'm talking to somebody, really maybe throwing in a few of these like ideas to someone and challenging their way of belief, and obviously it's a whole different realm, like versus like a philosophical philosophy is a lot more easy for my mind to wrap around, maybe for you, but maybe you're more economically minded, and this might be something you want to look into is, and really starting to go, and this is something that a lot of people that are involved in politics are really interested in economics, and probably more so in Marxist beliefs, but also people that aren't necessarily economically minded are going to also, because Marxism is very prevalent in our culture today. So it's important to know what it is and just know the basic understanding of it, but I also recommend you read the Communist Manifesto. I want to move on to New Spirituality. New Spirituality is a pantheistic worldview that teaches that everything and everyone is connected through divine consciousness. So this is now, again, a complete, like all these worldviews kind of almost are going, we're going this direction, and now this worldview is going almost a whole completely different direction. So New Spiritualists are very much, like you probably have heard like terms like New Age movement, transcendentalism, new consciousness or spirituality. That would be like a new spiritualist understanding. So what is pantheism? That's something we need to understand. Pantheism is the belief that reality is identical with divinity, or that all things compose an all-encompassing immanent God. Pantheists believe that Pantheists believe that we do not recognize, a distinct personal God, but instead there's a broad range of doctrines which are differing in different forms, and then they're going to deform the relationship between reality and divinity. So really, what new spirituality is, it's the modern search for mystery. It's really these ancient worldviews that are kind of coming up and masquerading as like a quote-unquote new path for meeting. It's always been there. Again, I should have pointed this out earlier, but a lot of these beliefs have always been in the world. It's not like they're new. It's just looking at how in 2021 people are going to be like understanding them. Just throwing that out there too. It's helpful for me to think about it that way. New spiritualists believe that everything is spiritual. So they'd actually say the material world isn't real. Material is an illusion, actually. So what is real is like the spiritual realm. So versus like a secularist who say like spiritualism is an illusion and the material world is all that exists. It's the complete opposite when you're talking to someone who believes in new spirituality. And a new spiritualist would say that hope springs up from rejecting traditional religion and embracing our divinity, power, and godlikeness. Only this will give us meaning and enable us to change our world. So these two people are really important. They've kind of influenced what new spirituality looks like today in America. The man on the left is Deepak Chopra, and he's a self-proclaimed spiritual teacher. And he says the problems we face are spiritual, but not religious. So he says, quote, "Religion cannot resolve this dilemma of the human condition. It has had its chances already, but spirituality can. We need to go back to the source of religion. That source isn't God, it's consciousness." It's interesting. He would say, like, religion's not the right way to find it. It's all about you. You are God. I am God. We are God, and that's really the answer here. And then the woman on the right here, her name was Rhonda Byrne, and she wrote a book called The Secret, which, interestingly enough, she published this as a hardcover copy, and it actually was the best-selling hardcover book in America for 2 consecutive years. If any of you have heard of the book, The Purpose-Driven Life by Rick Warren, it was up on that level of influence today. I was in a house the other day on a shoot. I work, I was a film major. I'm working in the media right now. And in the house, it was just an Airbnb we were at shooting in, there was The Purpose-Driven Life on the bookshelf. I was like, oh, that's interesting. You know, but like you can see that book all around. You'll see it at Goodwill. You'll see it everywhere. Like her book, The Secret, is going to be at the same level of you'll see it around. It was that popular. And she says, quote, "The secret means," which is defining the secret, it's capital secret. The secret means that we are creators of our universe and that every wish that we want to create will manifest in our lives. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second here. But a couple of things new spiritualists will believe is that everything is consciousness. And Eckhart Tolle, who's one of the world's most popular spiritual leaders, he's quoted with saying, "The whole world is made up of existence and being. The manifested and the unmanifested, the whole and God." So when you become aligned with the whole, you become a conscious part of the interconnectedness of the whole and its purposes, the emergence of consciousness into this world. Now, a lot of you probably actually are really, really familiar with this concept because a lot of you really love Star Wars. George Lucas actually had, I wouldn't say it was like an agenda, but he actually had kind of a purposeful, like, when he wrote Star Wars, he had, like, with the themes and things he wanted to talk about, it wasn't just random. He had a purpose to it. He said, "With Star Wars, I consciously set about to recreate myths and the classical mythological motifs. I wanted to use these motifs to deal with issues that exist today. I see Star Wars as taking all the issues that religion represents and trying to distill them down to a more modern and easily accessible construct. I'm telling an old myth in a new way." And, you know, you're all familiar. Obi-Wan talks about what the Force is. He says, well, the Force is what gives a Jedi his power. It's an energy field created by all living things that surrounds us and penetrates us. It binds the galaxy together. And this is actually like a really good description of what a new spiritualist would believe consciousness is when they're defining, like, what is consciousness? And Tolle would agree 100%. And again, it's just interesting to me that Lucas was mindful of this connection, and he was interested in promoting it too. It wasn't just like an accident, right? Lucas is also quoting with saying, "I've always tried to be aware of what I say in my films because all of us who make motion pictures are teachers with very loud voices." So again, what is this consciousness? If we're equating it to God, it's like God is this tool to be used. So Obi-Wan never says, get to know the Force or get to know what the Force thinks. It's use the Force, because the Force isn't a thing. It's or a being, it's a thing. And we use things. We don't relate to things. We relate to persons, but we use things. Another thing New Spiritualists will believe is that everyone is God. And I mentioned this earlier. John Bradshaw, who is an American educator, counselor, and motivational speaker and author, he says, each one of us has access to a superconscious, creative, integrative, self-organizing, intuitive mind whose capacities are apparently unlimited. This is the part of the consciousness that constitutes our godlikeness. Again, like everything is God, I am God, you are God, and we just need to figure out how to become like that, come up to that higher level of consciousness, right? The third thing is New Spiritualists will believe is that consciousness can be harnessed. So there is a way you can get up to this higher level of consciousness. I mentioned this man, but Eckhart Tolle, who's a German-born spiritual leader and self-help author, he wrote A New Earth, which is actually on Oprah Winfrey's book club recommendation list. He was actually on Oprah Winfrey. She promoted his book. She was like, I read this. It's at my bedside table. Like, I read this. I love this book, which is so interesting to me. But he believes that the new earth, he says, actually it's a quote from him, he says, the new earth arises as more and more people discover that their main purpose in life is to bring the light of consciousness into this world, and so that whatever you do as a vehicle, you do as a vehicle for consciousness. I'm sure a lot of you have actually heard of something called the law of attraction. This is something that has really gained a new resurgence within popularity, especially among like people my age and actually younger within the recent 2-3 years, even could be a little bit less than that. What the law of attraction is, this is the belief that everything is energy. So things are energy and thoughts are energy. So your good thoughts are going to bring about good things to you, and bad thoughts are going to bring about bad thoughts to you. I actually was on the lake last summer, and I was like, oh, that sounds actually just like a philosophical idea. I didn't know it was connected to new spirituality, and then I researched it and I realized, oh, this is actually not just like an idea, but this is like people actually believe that through meditation, if I think, like here's an example, if I want love in my life, I'm going to use the law of attraction and my thoughts to then bring that to me, which makes sense, right? Because if everything is consciousness, if my thoughts are energy, I can use my energy to like attract that energy that I want and get what I want, basically, right? Which is not something that people like think is just an idea. People actually believe that it's a real thing, which I will point out in a second here. Let's see here. Oh yeah, and then the fourth thing here that New Spiritualists believe is that your life purpose is the purpose in life is overcoming yourself, so coming up to that higher consciousness. And you need to free yourself daily through yoga and meditation. You can free yourself through reincarnation, some believe. Some don't believe in that, but religions like Hinduism and Buddhism are very much tied to New Spiritualist beliefs, which are a little bit different because American New Spiritualists would say that religion isn't something that's New Spiritualist. But if you're interested in looking at other world religions, you should look up things like Hinduism and Buddhism, which is going to be under New Spiritualist beliefs. But if you aren't aware, we actually have a Hindu temple in Maple Grove. These are some pictures from it. I went there as a 13-year-old, I think, and was blown away by the fact that this was right in my neighborhood, basically. It's beautiful, actually, really beautiful. But there's, this is actually something that people are attending and going to, and worship is happening here. And so it's not that this sounds like very much like Star Wars. I brought up Star Wars, right, which sounds science fiction. It's not science fiction. Like people are, and even I'm going to bring up an example here, but young people are really believing these New Spiritualist beliefs, which I'm actually going to jump to right now, and then I'll go back. So, like I mentioned before, people my age and younger are starting to really invest their thoughts and their time into manifestation. And this is just one example. There are actually a lot. I wanted to look up some stats here. According to one source, which is from 2020, so you can only imagine how it's grown now from here, but from 2020, so to give you some context, this is the platform TikTok, which is, I'm not on TikTok, so I'm not 100% familiar with what it is, but it's a social media platform where you can create content, short videos, and you can also watch videos. And it's actually, from what I gather, it's a lot of content, consuming content. A lot of people are consuming content on this. From like everything I've heard, it's just very addictive in the way they've programmed like the way this app works. And so you're constantly like receiving a lot of content, right? And so I was trying to see how many videos and like content out there is actually like new spiritualist. And according to a report in 2020, videos tagged manifestation and law of attraction have had 7 billion views. And so on manifestation, and then on law of attraction, 1 billion views respectively. That was in 2021, which now is, I would assume, is doubled, tripled, and I didn't look further until it's now 2021. But I'm not on TikTok, right? But sometimes like these TikToks will get reposted on other platforms. So I've even come across this, and I'm not even looking for it. And you can imagine how people that are actually looking for, how do I make my life better? And an attractive person, this is a user. She actually, that's all her content is. I was doing some research on her. She shows people, like this list right here was her showing, like it says, you can't read it, but it says like, I want to, or you need to follow, I need to manifest my dreams. And she's written that over and over, manifest my dreams, manifest my dreams, manifest my dreams. That's like a practice where she's, you know, her energy, right? She's putting energy, like she believes she's putting her energy into this manifestation practice, which will then get her what she wants. And she reports that, like, watch more of my videos to see how this actually came about in my life. So you can imagine if you're a young person looking for truth, looking for, how do I have this whole, I have something I'm looking for to fulfill. You see this on an app you have readily accessible to you, something that's popping up. Even like I said, I was even looking for it and it popped up. It's out there and people are watching it. So going back to recapping what spirituality is, the key word here is oneness. And recapping what new spiritualists believe, everything that exists is an impersonal spiritual force that we call God. Humanity is broken because of selfishness. Redemption comes by ridding ourselves of ego and melting into the oneness of all things. And so when talking about, I was thinking about how do I think about like talking about Christian response to this. I have a story. This is my story. I actually met this person over the summer when my family and I they're picking me up from Colorado, and we're taking a week-long trip back home. And we were at a hotel, and my sisters and I were just hanging, and there was this young guy there who was really just like friendly, and him and his dad were there. My dad started talking to his dad, and he started talking about himself and just seemed like willing to talk about stuff. And I mean, we had nothing to do, so we were talking to him. And then he mentioned like, oh yeah, I like to write. And I was like, oh, what do you write? And he's like, oh, I write about philosophy and politics. And I think he said like spiritualism. And I was like, oh, okay. Like my brain went, oh, here's a way I can turn the conversation in more of a spiritual way, right? Because he even himself introduced it. And I was like, okay, well, like what do you believe? And then he said, oh, you know, like I grew up as a Christian. He was 26 at the time, so he was a little older. He's like, I grew up as a Christian, but now I meditate, and I meditate 1 hour a day, and I don't remember exactly what he was saying, but he is a new spiritualist, basically. And in my head, I was like, my brain clicked, right? Because there's that recognizing of patterns, right? Because in my head, I was like, wow, okay. So then my brain kind of was able to wrap my mind more about who he was. And this guy was just searching. He was 26. Nothing against him. He was very friendly, very nice. But he was 26. Like, he didn't know what he wanted to study in college. He was telling me, like, he started a business and he liked it, but then he dropped it a few years later, and he didn't really know what he wanted to do. And he said, yeah, I got this book, and I've been, like, meditating, and I really like it. And it's interesting. He was like, and I started asking him, like, well, what do you believe? And he was like, oh, I think this, but, like, and then he said, oh, but whatever, like basically, long story short, he was saying, but whatever like, you want to believe in is good. Is like, that's great, too, but, like, I just think this is, like, a good way to believe, too. Right? So I think that when you encounter people who are new spiritualists, it's going to be probably a lot more common than, say, maybe a Marxist, although I could be wrong on that. Marxism is more of, like it's something that you'll come in contact with, but new spiritualist people, I think, are, especially, like, among the younger generation, again, I wasn't searching for anyone, but this guy happened to be in my vicinity, and I guess that especially where social media is now, and there is a really strong desire to find God, and especially, like, religion isn't dead. People are looking for something spiritual, but the thing about new spirituality is it seems attractive because religion is not involved. So when people think about a religion, they think of, you know, doctrine and there's a right way and a wrong way, but new spirituality is so attractive because it's kind of whatever you want. It's about you. So it's very, like, people are really gravitating towards that. So all that to say is, I think that when you're talking to someone who is new spiritualist, it's going to be about asking them about those big questions. Like, one of the other interns at Pulse, he's a preaching and teaching intern, and he was telling us about, he was talking to this guy, and he said, so he was he's really big on evangelism, so he was like, I was evangelizing to this guy, and I started asking him about his dreams and about what he wanted to do in life, and it was interesting. I think, and I really appreciated his approach. Like, I think when we started asking people about, like, their deep longings in life, like their dreams, and as Christians, we believe that there's no satisfaction without God, right? So we come with that assumption of, okay, well, this person isn't going to be satisfied by their worldview, right? So we're going to believe that. And so then that begs the question for us to, like, ask, like, you know, like, how has life been with, like, your life so far? Like, are you finding satisfaction? Probably not in those, like, dried and cut words, but especially if someone is interested in the spiritual, they're going to be more open to talking to you about that. So just something to think about. The last worldview I want to, like, briefly introduce you to is Post-Modernism. Post-Modernism is a skeptical worldview founded as a reaction to modernism, which I'll define in a minute here. And Post-Modernism is suspicious of meta-narratives and teaches that ultimate reality is inaccessible. Knowledge is a social construct, and truth claims are political power plays. So this is a reactionary worldview. This actually isn't, it's funny because it's like, is this even a worldview? But Myers and Noble claim that it is too, and I believe it is because it's a pattern of beliefs, right? Worldview, what is a worldview? Worldview is a pattern of beliefs that then lead to, you know, people living their life in a certain way. So which is what postmodernists would, their big questions are, should we be suspicious of truth? They would say, yes, we can't trust people. You can only trust yourself. A couple of key things that postmodernists really believe in is, again, modernism. So what's modernism? Modernism is a broad term used to describe a range of arts, attitudes, philosophies, and cultural moods that emerged following the 18th century, followed the Enlightenment era. And when we see postmodernism really come as a reaction, it's moving from, like, supernatural and giving away to skepticism, which skepticism is basically I was looking for, like, what's skepticism. It's a very, one thing about postmodernism that's interesting is it's a very confusing worldview. I have a quote here I'm going to read to you, which will help. Actually, I'm going to read it right now because I just said that, so I probably should give you an example of what I'm talking about. And even, like, this summer, Tripp read this when he was talking to the students. Like, again, since it's a reactionary worldview, it claims not to have any beliefs of its own. It really, again, but it does. Like, people that are postmodern have beliefs. And so Martin Heidegger, who was a postmodern philosopher, he said, in the naming, the things named are called into their thinging. Thinging, the unfold world, in which things abide, and so are the abiding ones. By thinging, things carry out the world. I'm sorry, I don't mean to laugh, but I'm going to read that for you again. In the naming, the things named are called into their thinging. Thinging, they unfold world, in which things abide, and so are the abiding ones. By abiding, things carry out the world. So I read that to you, and I'm going to tie that back in a few minutes here. But postmodernists, like, they have a very, like, when you meet someone who's postmodernist, they're going to be very, like, abstract in their thinking. And again, very reactionary in their thinking as well. But it's a very philosophical, like, worldview as well. Let me hop back to where I was. Give me a minute. A postmodernist would believe that truth is unknowable, and they are going to deny that any worldview really exists. There was a philosopher, Richard Rorty, who said we should give up on the correspondence of theory of truth and start treating moral and scientific beliefs as tools for achieving greater human happiness rather than representations of the intrinsic nature of reality. So how to describe this is, if you see a Ferrari down the road, what you're seeing really isn't a Ferrari. What you're seeing is, like, your interpretation. Or, like, if I put a picture of, like, him. So let's put a picture of this guy, so Richard up on the screen, right? What you're seeing about Richard right now really isn't him. It's, like, your thoughts about Richard. So I'm trying to like break this down a little bit for you. It's a little bit confusing, but a postmodernist would believe the reason we can't know truth is because we're limited by our experience, right? So this is kind of tying back to what skeptics would believe, is that the reason we believe what we believe is because of the society we grew up in today, and so therefore what you believe is really skewed, and so that's why truth isn't knowable. James K. Smith says, all of our experiences, they're already interpretation. So basically what James is saying is like nothing is really knowable because we already have like a preset like idea because of how you grew up or because of your society, and so nothing is really knowable. It's going to be flawed in some way, basically. And our concepts themselves are not objective because of our very thoughts about them are affected by thinking about them. And some postmodernists would say we can't have any access to reality at all, and we're only commenting on our comments, and we're only thinking about our thinking. And we can't really know anything for sure because we're trapped behind our perception. So I'm hoping this is making somewhat more sense as I talk about it. And really, how you define reality, it's going to be about really your perception about a thing. Postmodernists say we can't really have any direct or immediate access to reality. Again, going back to the Ferrari example, if you can't really see that Ferrari as it actually exists. You're only seeing what your interpretation of reality is. Like I said, in like an hour, it's hard to really define this. But I wanted to introduce you to these concepts and you can start thinking about it, with no pun intended. The third thing a postmodernist would believe is that there's really no human nature. You know, a Christian would believe like we can define human nature, we can really talk about it and have a discussion about it, and postmodernists would say, no, you really can't. What humans are is we're only an ever-evolving, highly sexual, social animal with multiple subjective interests crying out for recognition and acceptance. So there's really no self-identity, we can't have a permanent soul or mind, there's no human nature, because if truth isn't knowable, well then you can't define anything, right? So human nature is kind of up to what you think. And in my research I was coming across, basically my thought was, okay, well then how do postmodernists even like talk about their thoughts? And basically they believe that even just having the mere like getting together and talking about your thoughts is fine, it's good, but you're not going to get anywhere. Which is interesting. But it's true, like postmodernist philosophers will get together and they'll say, we can talk all we want about what we think. We're not really going to come to any conclusions because truth's unknowable, but it's still like a helpful exercise, I suppose. So the fourth thing postmodernists would really hold to is pragmatism. And pragmatism is the belief that propositions do not mirror reality, and therefore they should be treated as tools that are judged only by their practical consequences. So basically, you can have a proposition about what you think the world is, but it's really going to be only a reflection of reality. It's not going to be true. So again, like postmodernism is like a reactionary worldview, right? It's going to be like looking at other worldviews and saying, like trying to point out like the flaws with it. Oh, my bad. I want to go back a little bit. Or actually, I'll move on. So again, like this is helpful, hopefully, as I'm talking, I realize how this is a little bit convoluted, but suspicion, if that helps you at all. Suspicion is the key understanding of postmodernism. The physical universe is all there is. Humanity is broken because those in power force everyone else to submit to their idea of ultimate truth, but redemption comes through regarding all such claims with suspicion and focusing instead on our own socially constructed personal experiences. So there is something to be said, a postmodernist would say, about like looking at what you think, but you're not going to get to reality. Some responses, again, this is also very philosophical, which if you're someone who enjoys like philosophical debating, talking with people, this is, you're going to find people that are that way as well who believe this. Some things you can really bring up to a postmodernist is postmodernism can highlight some important concerns in a way about the world, but they take them too far. We can recognize that our experiences are a large part of who we are, and yet we can make responsible decisions about how to judge between competing viewpoints. So a postmodernist would say you can't make judgments, and as a Christian we'd say, no, that's the opposite, we actually can make judgments. One big thing, which maybe picked up on by now, is that postmodernists actually contradict themselves. You might hear someone say, you're not in a position to know what's right for me. That's a postmodernism view. You can't tell me what to think. I have my own beliefs, you have yours, that's great. You can't tell me what to think. The postmodernist saying that has actually just made a statement about her own philosophy that can't be upheld. because if you see this, the postmodernist is imposing their concept of truth on you, right? So you can respond by saying, I get the impression that you think I should believe what you just said to me. Is that the case? If so, why are you imposing your concept of truth onto me? Again, it's all about just recognizing, like, because again, if we as Christians believe we have the truth, right? It's all about coming to the table saying, and really making people, again, not imposing like, oh, well, imposing the idea of you're wrong, but also imposing the idea that you're wrong in a way that helps people on their own make the switch in their head and say, oh, wow, I didn't think about it in that way before. A third thing you can really bring up to a postmodernist is their idea of personhood. And their view of personhood is unsettling. And the result of this can be seen in actually the Roe versus Wade decision. When Roe versus Wade was being decided, those in the government were looking at the Constitution and they were interpreting it as a living document. So this is a postmodern view, saying that it's open to our interpretation. If there's no truth that really can be known, it's up to our interpretation, then we can take this document here that was written, and we can say that there's no discernible truth here to be known, rather it's up to our interpretation and what we think about reality, right? And so those writing the Roe versus Wade decision took the Constitution and they actually invented new meanings from the old text, saying that we actually have governmental grounds here to actually make this decision. And you and I as a Christian would hold that the abortion decision, and even more so, let me just point out that actually, this is kind of a different topic, but if you're thinking about like the whole pro-life movement, be encouraged in that there are actually a lot of pro-lifers in my generation, more than you would think, especially because science has really started, there's undeniable proof that abortion does indeed kill a living human being. And so all that to say is, like, I bring up this example because I think today, I think 20 years ago it would have been more controversial, but I think even more today, I think there's, my generation is a pro-life generation, interestingly enough. Anyway, I go back to this. If we, believe that babies don't have any essential nature in a way, like human nature is really kind of dependent on what we kind of decide, then that's exactly what we should have predicted. Like Roe versus Wade shouldn't be a surprise to us. It's kind of predictable. It's what it is the result of a postmodern belief. Confucius, interesting, I'm bringing him up as a source, but you'll see why in a minute here. Confucius is known for saying, when words lose their meanings, people lose their freedom. And there's an interesting, like here, I'll explain here. So this is Michael Bauman. He was a longtime teacher at Summit, passed away I think maybe during COVID. I had him as a teacher. It was such an intelligent man, my goodness. But he takes what Confucius says and he kind of changes it in a way which I really, really like. He says, when words lose their meanings, people lose their lives. So, again, as a Christian coming to someone who is postmodern, someone who's really, like a lot of what postmodernists say is going to be, in a way, defendable through, like, even just logic, if you're interested in that, like looking into that. But also just looking at, like, the results of postmodernism, like Roe versus Wade is a good decision, and seeing that, like, the postmodernists, if you take the worldview and lead it to its logical conclusion, the end result is doesn't lead to life. Quite literally. Again, going back to everything here, I really hope, like, my hope wasn't to really, because I'm not a scholar, I don't have a master's, I'm just very, very much, like, passionate about worldview and I think why it's important, and wanted to really introduce you to, again, these 5 if wrong, I count Christianity, but 5 other worldviews today that people believe, because again, like Pastor Keith has been preaching about a lot, it's really about connecting with people. Apologetics is the defense of the faith. And why I think this is connected is, again, understanding the times. When you come as someone who knows what to do about the times, you're going to come as someone who has studied, who cares, and this is part of that. And so I just really hope that, and Pastor Keith asked me to really give you a book list, which I did last time, so this isn't review, and I have these up here. So first, I want to bring up that this is where I got a lot of my source information. I have my note on here, but I won't take it off so you can see the title. This is Understanding the Times, which is there's actually a series of these books. There's Understanding the Times, Understanding the Culture and Understanding the Faith, which were written by, Jeff Myers wrote the other 2 books, but this is all David Noble worked on this, which was the original president of Summit. But this is where, actually, I had to cut so much, you guys, and I felt really bad, because I was like, I feel like this is like throwing out so many ideas, and I'm not really tying it all together. But in a way, because my goal wasn't really to like give you a ton of head knowledge. It's just introduce you to these are what people are believing today, and here's where you can see it actually in the world today. But I really, this is a big investment. This is actually a gift to me, so I'm really thankful I have this. But Understanding the Times, it not only has a survey of these competing worldviews, but also it goes into talking about politics, philosophy, economics, and talks about then how these worldviews are really in each of those disciplines, academic disciplines. When I spoke here in 2019, my talk was really centered around this book, which was Tactics by Greg Koukl. This is something I still hold to today, which I think is something that I think Pastor Keith has alluded to, which is when you're talking to people, and this is more apologetic space, I guess. When you're talking to people about your faith, it's really about asking them questions. And people will talk about themselves. I mean, granted, I do too. But all I have to say is, like, when you get people to talk and open up and you ask them questions, then they're going to be able to. And then the end goal there isn't just to have conversations. During my internship, Mark Warder, who's our internship dad, he had like a talk to us the other day, because he gives little like discipleship, more like teachings. And he asked us the other day, he's like, I want you guys to, first off, he asked us, like, how do you, when you're talking to people, bring up, like, your faith? And he gave us some examples on, or he basically was trying to encourage us, like, think about, like, be intentional about when you're talking to people, how can you, think about how you can turn the conversation into, like, not even, like, spiritual, but, like, even theological about beliefs, because from there, like, you know, when you kind of establish that, about, like, talking with people, then they're more, then you have some grounds for bringing up your belief, which is versus just coming to someone and saying, hey, what do you believe? And, oh, I think you're wrong, and here's why. But, which is where Greg Koukl kind of goes into talking about questions and why those are important. And really getting people to a place where on their own, they're able to discover and see the faults in their worldview on their own, which is helpful for you to kind of point it out. But when someone on their own can really all of a sudden realize, like, oh, I didn't quite think this through, or that's a flaw in my own logic, that's going to stick with someone way longer than even your conversation you have with them. Both will, but that's very powerful. This is written by Jeff Myers. This is a book called Unquestioned Answers, which came out, and as soon as it came out, I bought it and read it. But this is something that's apologetics-based in a way, but it actually is just something I recommend because it helps us kind of think about our own faith. And Unquestioned Answers, the byline is Rethinking 10 Christian Cliches to Discover Biblical Truths. And the reason why I bring this up is because when we're thinking about talking to other people about their faith, they're going to ask us about ours. And so we need to really have thought through intentionally, like, why do I actually believe what I believe? Which when I was 18, I hadn't, and I'm still wrestling a lot with different questions. And I mean, I think faith is, when someone asks you, I believe when you say faith like that, that's valid too. But I think also coming to the table with some thought out answers also, it was really going to help people know, like, oh, wow, you actually have cared about what, you know, you believe, and it's not because you grew up in the church your whole life, which is a wonderful place to be, but also just having thought more beyond that. So just to give you some, like, insight into what this book is about, like, there's some things we hear in the church growing up, like, God said it, I believe it, that settles it for me. It's just me and Jesus, love the sinner, hate the sin. A big one I was coming back to a lot was Jesus was a social justice warrior. It's not my place to judge. Just things that we hear a lot, and how do we respond to that in a Christian way, in a way that's actually accurate, and in a way that actually reflects reality versus, which is something I wanted to kind of dive into today, but, like, how do we look at what reality is, and how do we talk about that in like a wise and succinct way. I have the Bhagavad Gita, which is a new spiritualist, going off that direction if you're interested in that. And this, I would also recommend, so along these lines, I recommend, like, again, like, any kind of writings that I brought up that were the Communist Manifesto, the Humanist Manifesto. You should read the Quran. Reading books that are like the religious texts, and I say religious texts, like the Humanist Manifesto, you can argue that was a religious text, but that, I think that's not only just interesting, I mean, for me, it's super helpful to, like, hear what really learned scholars have to say about those texts, but reading it yourself when you're at a place where you feel like you can is really helpful. So I'd really recommend that. Sean McDowell, who I've quoted a lot, wrote A New Kind of Apologist. Actually, wait, he didn't write this. He edited this. He got together with a lot of different writers and apologists around the nation, and he had them come together and write about apologetics in the world today, which is just, as someone who grew up with his dad being apologetic speaker, it's just very interesting to me that he got together with people and was looking at, okay, as now we're looking into 2021, then 2030, 2040, how do we continue to not keep apologetics relevant, but like that's how we should be thinking, right? It's as the world continues to evolve in their thinking, and it's not even in how they're thinking, it's because these ideas, they're not new, right? It's just people and how they understand it changes, and how they talk about it changes. So how do we not change what we're saying, but change our language in a way, change our approach? So this book was incredibly helpful for me, and talks about, oh my goodness, there's a couple, I think there's 30 different chapters in here, and talks about things like, again, Islam, how to question the Bible in a post-Christian culture. I'm just picking here. Telling the truth about sex in a broken culture, transgender, truth and compassion. Oh, that's Alan Schliemann. Let's see, a multi-ethnic church, urban apologist, why we should love questions. Anyway, super broad, but very helpful, again, to start having us think about what people today are asking and how we can approach it. And the last thing, I had a couple others, but I'm actually going to end with The Secret Battle of Ideas About God. I was actually going to, and I really hope I can in the future, talk about this at some level, because this is actually, I bought this when I found out it was coming out, and this is from Jeff Myers, but the byline is Overcoming the Outbreak of 5 Fatal Worldviews. And this is, I keep on going back to these questions, because this is actually, in a way, I almost feel like, actually, you know what? If you want to buy anything first, buy this. Don't buy anything else. Actually, buy this first. Because this, the questions that, again, I keep bringing them back to, I keep bringing it up, but am I loved? Why do I hurt? Does my life have meaning, and why can't we just get along? Is there any hope for the world? Is God even relevant? So what Myers does is he has one chapter where he'll talk about, like, am I loved? And then chapter 3, then chapter 4 talks about love never fails, how Jesus meets our heart's deepest longings. Then chapter 5, why do I hurt? Chapter 6 says we shall overcome, how Jesus heals our hurts and gives us the victory. Like a big one, why can't we just get along? About peace, justice, like what's going on in our world with that? And that's a big topic that has come up very recently in the past couple months actually. And then then Myers has a response, peace wins, how Jesus offers the elusive harmony we all seek. I point to these authors not to say, I almost feel like sometimes it's not like I'm saying like, oh, anything I've heard I'm not trying to have like a scapegoat in a way and say like, oh, if anything I said today wasn't that great, it's because I'm not, like that's not what I'm trying to say, just because like these people are like not masters of a subject, but it takes about it's not common knowledge, but out there, 10,000 hours for you to become a scholar, master at anything. I thought about that a lot when I was playing violin. I was like, I can't even get 1 hour in a day. I'm supposed to get 10,000. And these men these books that these people have studied, I've had the honor of like meeting them, of listening to them preach and talk. They are very knowledgeable people, and I think that even more than just anything I could have said today, and then like I said, my hope is just to like spark these ideas in your head, and then for you to carry on and continue that, and just really hopefully just see the importance and the relevance of at least considering this, and knowing that people that believe these ideas exist in the world today, and just to be mindful of it. I'd love to pray us out too, and I thank you all for your attention. You all are amazing, but yes.
Can we give it up for Christine, please? Okay, that was awesome. That was amazing. Thank you. A little point of information. So the book that you mentioned, Understanding the Times, that's on Amazon. The hardcover is $27.45. The Unquestioned Answers is $17.99 on Amazon. These are available. The New Kind of Apologist is $11.59. And I think you'll be interested to know that the last one she mentioned, The Secret Battle of Ideas About God, is cheaper in hardcover than it is in paperback, $15.80 on Amazon. So thank you. How many would like to hear from her again? Yeah, so I don't think this is the last time we're going to be asking Christine to come back and teach. So I want to say thank you. And let's stand and let's ask Christine to close us out in a word of prayer. Can we give her a round of applause for thanks? Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. You guys are very kind. Thank you for, it's very helpful for me too, in a way to like talk and be up here and be forced to like, okay, like when people are listening to me, how am I going to respond? So I appreciate, thank you for you guys for even like being here. I really appreciate that. But thank you, Pastor Keith, for the opportunity. But yeah, let me pray. God, thank you so much for today. Thank you for the church. Thank you for Riverwood. Thank you for giving us each other and this community of believers where in a world where we have a lot of opposition, God, where you give us each other and you give us men and women who really love you, who have studied these things where we can turn to them. I pray that we can have drive and inspiration to really use our minds to love you and love our neighbors. And I just pray that you can be with each one of us as we continue to learn more about you, not only with our knowledge, but also with our hearts, God. Continue to bring people into our lives who we can minister to and talk to and have relationships with. And I pray for each one of us here as we continue to really invest in other people's lives, that we can be a good witness for you, God. Amen.